Hello and welcome to Press TV's debate. I'm Marcia Hashimi. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, since it became obvious that the Syrian army, along with its allies, were going to liberate Aleppo, Western capitals, have been working overtime in their propaganda campaign to tarnish the Syrian government and its allies. Along with political propaganda, the mainstream media has switched to full throttle in their attempts to paint terrorists as militants and the liberation of a city as genocide. But the question to ask is why? That's what we'll be looking at on the debate. But right now, I want to cross over to Aleppo and Press TV's Muhammad Ali to get the latest on the ground. What is going on there? Muhammad Ali, please fill us in.
Yes, the latest was that about 50 buses took off today towards the Kfaria and Foua villages in Idlib countryside. They took off from El Ramoussi in Aleppo's southern countryside over there after the deal was reactivated, of course, the deal for evacuating the terrorists and civilians from inside the eastern parts of Aleppo. The deal, of course, also covers the Kfaria and Foua village in Idlib countryside. It was suspended because terrorists blocked them from exiting. Now the al-Nusra Front agreed after talks between all sides to allow those injured and sick civilians to exit from the Kfaria and Foua villages. We know, according to many reports, that those buses have arrived in Kfaria and Foua in Idlib countryside. We don't know when exactly they will be transporting those civilians out. We are expecting them to arrive in Aleppo after they are exiting, of course, after they exit from Kfaria and Foua. We also know that as soon as the first batch of injured and sick civilians with their families exit Kfaria and Foua, the other terrorists who are still inside the eastern parts of Aleppo with their families, which make up 1,100 terrorists, of course, besides their families, will also start getting out. Expectations that by tomorrow morning this will be happening on the ground. Maybe tomorrow we could be seeing the entire city of Aleppo cleared of terrorists, of course, after 4 years of war inside the city. We were there today on the front lines. We saw the civilians gathering along with the people inside the eastern parts of Aleppo. Our camera got them, and we saw them how they were gathering and leaving those areas towards the exit point of El Ramoussi. We still have to wait and see what the next hours will bring with them.
All right, thank you so much for that update. Out of Aleppo, that's Press TV's Muhammad Ali. I'd like to welcome my guests, the other part of the program, Professor, City University of New York, Mr. Daniel Shaw, and out of New York, Professor George Washington University, Nabil Mikhal, out of Washington. Thank you both for being with us. So let's start this off in D.C. and Nabil Mikhal, in your perspective, you've just heard our correspondent on the ground there giving us the latest update. What do you think the terrorists, especially after losing in Aleppo, then wouldn't even abide by the terms in order for them to evacuate?
For one, the American media and the British media paid attention to what has been transpiring in Aleppo. The covers of Time magazine and The Economist in its American edition just mentioned what is after Aleppo. So this is a turning point in the Syrian civil war. What will the terrorists do? What will those who left Aleppo do? It depends on where they are going. Frankly, the whirl of the events, the speed of what is going on prevented me from scrutinizing fully what has been going on, so I will focus on the highlights. I understand now that Russia and Turkey are coordinating the effort to stem any tide of refugees flow, and that the pro-Assad forces are in control of Aleppo. So in terms of the immediate surrounding, I do not think that those who left under whatever designation are able to go either to Iraq or to Turkey, which are the adjacent or the neighboring countries to Syria. So basically, what will they do depends on where their destination. But I think here, and just tentatively, because also we have the examination period and it's overwhelming, to sum up, I believe that all the eyes are on Vladimir Putin. What is he going to do next? I heard that the opposition is going to meet with some representatives from the Russian government. So that actually can be more essential and more important. So the situation in Aleppo has many important geopolitical ramifications.
Okay, stay with me for that. I'm going to get to the importance. Stay with me, Mr. Mikhail. I'm going to get to the importance, the geopolitical ramifications of all this. But let me get Daniel Shaw in on this. Your take on what our first guests have just said about the current situation on the ground.
Well, it looks like the terrorist forces in Aleppo, now that they've been routed by the Syrian Arab army, who sacrificed an incredible amount to liberate the city from terrorism and from terrorism's backers. There's Saudi backers and Jordanian backers and Turkish backers, and of course the Pentagon and the CIA. They're trying to relocate. In Palmyra, we saw another ISIS presence in the past few days, which sought to serve as a distraction so that the Syrian Arab army would have to focus on Palmyra as well, when it was clear that they were taking control over Aleppo. And now they're trying to head to Raqqa, to Idlib. And the United States media is setting up a scenario where the Syrian government is denied the right to defend itself and is accused of all of the horrific actions. The US media has disappeared ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the other terrorist forces from the equation, just magically, with a magic wand. It's as if imperialism is a magic wand.
Daniel Shaw, why is that the case? You just pointed out to something that's happening currently, the way, as I said in my introduction, the all-out blitz by the media. And then you just pointed out that it's basically not even looking at the terrorists at all. Why is that the case?
Because from the jump, imperialism has had a dual strategy with ISIS. If ISIS is attacking an imperialist ally, say in Mosul in Iraq, then ISIS is dubbed a terrorist. To the extent that ISIS can do the bidding of imperialism, specifically now in Syria, then they keep ISIS on a short leash that they can control. And Saudi Arabia has played a huge role in this, in exporting terrorism, as had Turkey, but the United States really functions as the umbrella, as the coordinator of these different intelligence services, which have been giving all types of aid and arms to ISIS from the beginning of this conflict in 2011 in Syria.
Well, Mr. Nabil Mikhail, when there's so much noise being made, meaning political and media blitzes I've talked about by the West regarding Aleppo, do you think that there is something else going on? Is it that these entities are really that concerned all of a sudden about the people of Aleppo, or do you think there are possibly ulterior motives?
I understood the question this way, like say you're telling me how do you interpret the events in Aleppo. I think, yeah, they are very important because Aleppo, I mean, this is since our primary school education, we always studied that Aleppo as a very important cradle of civilizations. But I prefer to relate it to also what is happening in Iraq. It seems to me that, and I will emphasize only the strategic dimensions of the situation, there is a power corridor being cultivated and developed between Mosul and Aleppo. And who will control it? I do not think that the United States can send the troops. I do not think that the Arab League can authorize a collective security measure. So I believe that there are now three important military players: the Russian armed forces, the Syrian armed forces loyal to the government of Damascus, and also the Iraqi armed forces under the command of Haider al-Abadi, the current prime minister.
Okay.
Perhaps, remember also that time is important. Obama is leaving soon. I think there will be some sort of deliberation between these three militaries to create some strategic locus of power. And the new American administration will deal with them and decide the situation in the rest of Syria and the rest of Iraq, and also in relationship to Turkey accordingly.
Okay, well, Daniel Shah, there are unconfirmed reports that there were high-ranking NATO officers caught in a bunker in Aleppo. Allegedly, they were American, Turkish, Saudis, and from other nations. If this is true, tell me, what does it mean? What is the significance of it?
Well, whether that's true or not, we know all too well that both covertly, even and overtly, they've bragged about it in the New York Times. NATO and the U.S. has openly supported this resistance. They now call them rebels, since they no longer want to use the word ISIS, which is not palpable to the American public. But it's the same strategy. They demonize and demonize Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian state, whose true crime has nothing to do with humanitarianism or human rights violations. That's just the fig leaf. The true crime is some sense of economic nationalism. And we're not trying to say here that Assad is some type of socialist force, but at the very least he's a bourgeois nationalist force, and he stands for some type of sovereignty for Syria. So if they can knock over the next domino in their geopolitical plan, if Syria goes down, they're closer to an encirclement strategy of Iran. Let's not forget that Syria has a border only 500 or 600 miles away from southern Russia. So they're closer to the strategic prize of Russia. Russia's already surrounded by NATO troops in Estonia, in Latvia, in Georgia. So that's the grand strategy of U.S. imperialism. All of these crocodile tears by Samantha Power at the United Nations and all of these UN officials, it's meant to serve as a camouflage for the true motivations of the West, which is regime change. And of course, regime change is a fancy euphemism for recolonization.
What about that, Mr. Mikhail? Wasn't that the actual plan all the time by the U.S. and its allies, was regime change in Syria, as our guest has stated? And it seems, if that is the case, that it has failed?
It's a long story. However, I disagree, and I respect the other guests from New York. But just I have two disagreements, because I do not think that the troops in the Baltic republics of Latvia, Estonia are really encircling the Russian Federation. Russia is more powerful than them. As far as the idea of regime change, it is the biggest dilemma for American foreign policy. It is how to reconcile moralism with realism. America went to Iraq to change the regime, but also there was a great deal of miscalculation because there was an insurgency that followed. In Syria, it was a protracted insurgency. And when the United States was not able to basically settle the equation, another power intervened, which is Russia. So just let us try to be thinking in terms of realpolitik. Can the United States intervene further in the Syrian civil war in the light of the fact that Obama has only a little over a month? And frankly, I do not understand, I cannot figure out Obama's attitude towards Syria. So also, there should be the rendering of the opinion that the Obama administration failed to play the Syria card. They could not pressure Russia, and they could not really promote policies that really could make the regime change of al-Assad a reality. So here there is a failure of the Obama administration. Let us just focus on the next 5 weeks. What will happen?
What do you think is going to happen? You keep talking about this interim prior to Trump coming in. What do you think is going to happen, sir? Staying with you, Mr. Mikhail.
Looking through the crystal ball here in Washington, I think there will be two things. There will be a great deal of brinkmanship and the worsening of relationship between Washington and Moscow. Obama is so immature in foreign policy, he will try basically to sharpen his rhetoric against Russia And I do not think that Putin will take him seriously, and Putin will also use a very tough language.
Okay.
Second, there could be some regional developments.
Okay, go ahead.
Like, say, more developments in Iraq, more developments in Turkey, and at the end, and I hope I'm wrong, there could be also a terror attack that could shape the legacy of Obama. So things are so speedy and in a state of flux. It's like the end of the Cold War.
Okay.
A new president's coming, a new president leaving who failed in foreign policy. Terrorism could happen. Syria is basically reshaping the political landscape.
All right, stay with me, sir.
Iraq is
stay with me, sir. Mr. Shah, you heard our guest, Mr. Mikhail, and say, I want to look at the significance. Do you think that the victory now in Aleppo by the Syrian government signifies a turning point, not only in the war in Syria, but in regional international politics when we see the alliance that has been formed with Syria, with Russia, with Iran, with Hezbollah, and obviously being successful, at least in Aleppo?
Aleppo has been a turning point because in 1999 you have Yugoslavia, which is broken up and bombed at will by NATO and the US, and Russia stands aside and can do nothing, and China can do nothing. Then in 2011 you have Libya, another conflict that is funded from without, another attempt to roll back any sense of Arab and Middle Eastern sovereignty, Northern African sovereignty. But this time Russia takes a stand, and Russia defends its own geopolitical interests and says enough is enough. So it has been a major turning point. I would ask Professor Mahal to consider if Russia was fueling conflicts along the Canadian border, or in Mexico City, for example, would the U.S. stand idly by and just allow these terrorist forces to threaten the United States? No, they would immediately intervene and defend themselves, and that's what Russia has done. Russia has taken a stand and said this is too close to home. And we should now look at these next 5 weeks. When Trump takes office, it's really unpredictable. We can only speculate at this point of what a Trump foreign policy will mean towards Russia, towards the world. What we see is a split in the different foreign policy wings of the US government. We had a more hawkish wing personified by Hillary Clinton, who wanted World War III, who wanted all-out aggression towards Russia. And then Trump comes in, who's supposed to be the Republican, and on so many fronts he's more of a bigot and more of a hawk, but towards Russia he hasn't been, not because he cares about the Russian people, but because he cares about Russian oil and Russian gas reserves. Russia represents a market of some 200 million people that the U.S. can tap into. So the appointment of Tillerson as the Secretary of State, the CEO of ExxonMobil, is very, very significant. This is a sign that major wings of the U.S. foreign policy establishment, they want to make profits off of Russia. They don't want war with Russia. So that right now is the transition that we can see from an Obama foreign policy to a Trump foreign policy.
All right, stay with me, sir, because I want to get the answer from both of you on this last question. Mr. Mikhail, is the victory in Aleppo the beginning of the end to the war in Syria in your perspective? In 1 minute, sir.
Yes, it will lead to major political and military changes inside Syria. And let me repeat what I said. There is a power corridor being built between Mosul and Aleppo, and it could affect other Syrian cities. And it is a tough challenge for Obama to basically answer or reply to these important geopolitical changes occurring in two areas the United States try to change. And the confirmation or the no confirmation of the proposed name for a new Secretary of State will also test the new relationship of the Trump administration with Congress. So I like him to be Secretary of State, but it's not confirmed.
All right, stay with me, sir. Let me just get Mr. Shah. I'm so sorry, I'm out of time. But Mr. Shah, same question. Is it the beginning of the end of the war in Syria, the victory of Aleppo?
this is not the end. The U.S. and their umbrella of proxy powers, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, down the line, Jordan, is going to stop at nothing until they can overthrow Assad. They did the same thing in Libya. They're trying to reattempt that. They're going to rearm terrorist forces. They're trying to make these sound like more moderate or benign forces when you can't separate ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra. That's the essence of who these rebels are, as much as they try to sanitize them. So they're going to move their war now into Idlib, into Raqqa, and this war is going to, very unfortunately, I wish I could have a brighter prognosis, but not for 1 second would we ever trust U.S. imperialism in their overall intentions to overthrow the Syrian state, Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian Arab army, which represents one of the last vestiges with Iran, with Hezbollah, of actual sovereignty in the Middle East.
Okay, and on that note, I appreciate both of you being with us. Professor from City University of New York, Daniel Shah, out of New York. Professor George Washington University, Nabil Mikhal, out of Washington, D.C. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us on another debate. I'm Marzieh Hashemi signing out. See you next time.